Over the long span of Roman history, few men have remained as eternally relevant and engaging as Marcus Tullius Cicero. We are fortunate that so much of his correspondence and literary output survives, because the great polymath was at the forefront of so many areas that he provides us a compelling portrait of Roman thought in the fields of philosophy, rhetoric, law, and politics. Few things seem to have escaped his prodigious mind, and he has justly earned his place as one of the most influential intellectuals and scholars of all time. His intelligence fed his natural sense of elitism and incredible ego, so I've always found it ironic that because of the limitations of his era, you and I, middling intellects though we are, know more about the early history of Rome than Cicero, or indeed any person who actually lived in and experienced Roman society. They, of course, know infinitely more than us about what it meant to be a Roman, but as far as concrete facts go, we have the edge on Cicero. This isn't his fault. Cicero just happened to live thousands of years before the advent of archaeology and source criticism, which allow us to dissect the tales the ancient Romans told about their own distant past and identify where pious myth-making or patriotic feelings mask elements of Roman history that later generations sought to gloss over. One of the most intriguing areas where historical reality and the approved Roman narrative diverge most significantly is at the end of the Roman monarchy and the foundation of the Republic. This is unsurprising, as all nations tend to mythologize aspects of their own founding, but the Romans proved so successful in altering the tale that centuries later the myth had become the reality. In the tale that is presented to us, the fall of the Tarquin dynasty and subsequent founding of the Republic is closely bound up in the tragedy of Lucretia, the virtuous wife of Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus. According to Roman folklore, her unparalleled modesty piqued the jealousy of Sextus Tarquinius, the eldest son of the tyrannical king Tarquin the Proud. He then violently assaulted her and violated her with glee. This affront proved to be the final straw for the house of the Tarquins, and the Republican hero Brutus led a coalition of other aristocrats to overthrow the dynasty and solemnly swear that Rome would never again tolerate a king. This tale formed the bedrock of Republican identity and proved a rationale for their deep-seated antipathy towards monarchs. But how much of it is true? Is it possible that the story of Lucretia and the expulsion of the Tarquins bears only a passing resemblance with reality? We are comfortable with the idea that Lucretia may never have existed, but what if the Romans never actually overthrew the monarchy themselves? What if the monarchs were deposed by someone else altogether, and Brutus's revolution was just a myth to save face? Strictly speaking, because the first attestations of this tale come centuries later, we don't know how much of the narrative surrounding the tyranny of the Tarquins is true. Indeed, the story may have some facts at its roots, but looking at the story in the wider context of the ancient Mediterranean quickly reveals similarities with the earlier overthrow of the Pisistratid family in Athens. In addition, the characterization of Tarquinius Superbus in our sources conforms a little too neatly with prevailing Greek theories on what exactly constituted a tyrant. This is, of course, not to defend his character, but we must note that by disregarding laws, executing opponents, and impugning the chastity of noble women, he hits every mark. A perfect 100% score on the Tyranny Index. The Romans were always keen to show that they were as cultured and sophisticated as the Greeks, meaning that many aspects of early Roman history were interpreted, consciously or not, through the lens of Greek thought. Because our sources are all so far removed from the actual events they are describing, it is difficult to tell which aspects are genuine and which have been embellished and interpreted through the influence of Hellenism. But the narratives also appear to have been subtly altered to advance key aspects of Roman ideology. Again, it is difficult to say how conscious this effort was. Redactions and conflicting traditions certainly exist, but the goal may not have always been intentional deception. Rather, a patriotic Roman would have viewed the past as confirming and reifying official Roman ideology, and so interpreted events through this perspective. This frequently manifests in historians overlaying institutions and political developments that were contemporaneous onto the ancient past. Similarly, the political struggles of their era seem to be endlessly repeated in the past, despite the fact that different material conditions and socio-economic realities would have meant earlier political debates had a unique character. These flaws in Roman history are a result of the fundamentally conservative Roman character that viewed the past as always more virtuous, always more in touch with the land, and always more pious. They had difficulty accepting that culture, religion, and even governmental institutions could evolve over time, as each generation wrestled with its own contradictions. In their histories, therefore, the political and economic points of friction for the earliest Romans were not altogether much different from the Rome they experienced. They simply occurred at a smaller scale. History was also recognized as a perfect canvas to teach timeless moral truths, something that is seen again in the narrative surrounding the assault on Lucretia and the subsequent downfall of the Tarquins. For despite her innocence being acknowledged by all, the one-dimensional Lucretia commits suicide immediately after confessing her defilement and demanding retribution against the Tarquins. Lucretia, stricken to the heart at the disgrace, sent the same messenger to her father in Rome and husband in Ardea, which was to come with one trustworthy friend. It must be done this way, and done quickly. A terrible thing had happened. Spurius Lucretius arrived with Publius Valerius, son of Volesus, Collatinus with Lucius Junius Brutus, in whose company he was traveling en route to Rome when his wife's messenger chanced to meet him. They found Lucretia seated, downcast, in her bedchamber. At the arrival of her father and husband, tears welled up, and when her husband asked, "Are you all right?" she replied, "Indeed, no. What can be right when a woman's virtue has been taken from her? The impress of another man is in your bed, Collatinus. Yet only my body was defiled. My soul was not guilty. Death will be my witness in this. But pledge with your right hands and swear that the adulterer will not go unpunished." Sextus Tarquinius did this. A guest who betrayed his host, an enemy in arms last night, took his pleasure, fatal, alas, to me, and, if you act as you should, to him. Each pledged his word in turn, and tried to comfort the heartsick woman by fixing the guilt not upon the victim but the transgressor. The mind sins, they said, not the body, and there is not guilt when intent is absent. It is up to you, she said, to punish the man as he deserves. As for me, I absolve myself of wrong, but not from punishment. Let no unchaste woman hereafter continue to live because of the precedent of Lucretia. She took a knife she was hiding in her garments and drove it into her breast. Doubling over, she collapsed in death. The simplicity of this story is part of what enabled it to resonate with Romans, and for its echoes to be felt even down to the present. But any simplistic black-and-white tale from the ancient world should awaken our inner skeptic, and scholars have long questioned the authenticity of the tale. The narrative, as recounted hundreds of years later in Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus, feels anachronistic and fits the patriarchal needs of the later community so well that it is now regarded as largely a literary invention rather than historical fact. Did the Romans have any doubts about the story? The patriotic Livy freely confesses that some elements of his histories are implausible, but declines to show skepticism here. Cicero, in a letter to Brutus, states that Rome's early history is a forgery, but repeats the story of Lucretia in his Republic, praising her virtue and contrasting her with Sextus Tarquinius without any sense that the story may not be true. This acceptance demonstrates how fictions can still be damaging if they are widely believed. Lucretia's suicide, despite her acknowledged innocence, had a horrific effect on Roman women, reinforcing a culture which sought control over every aspect of their sexuality, and defining expectations for the honorable action they should take if their chastity was ever compromised, even if they were the clear victim of rape. The myth of Lucretia was simply another tool used to convince Roman women that they were to exist as no more than elaborate decorations that testified to the virtue of their fathers, husbands, and sons. But as stated earlier, Lucretia and her tragic death were just the preface to the more consequential part of the story. explaining why Rome became a republic and why kings were anathema. A nice narrative for keeping women in their place is useful, but what really inspired Roman men was the thought of their intrepid forebears overthrowing a tyrant, but still possessing the wisdom to understand the dangers inherent in absolute power. Brutus, or some figure that resembled him, may have existed, but some academics propose a theory that the Roman monarchy wasn't actually ended by the Romans themselves, but rather it was the invasion and perhaps occupation of Rome by the Etruscan king Lars Porsena, which expelled the Tarquins from the city. Rome's war with Porsena is attested in the sources, but in our received narrative he fights against the young republic in order to restore Tarquin to his throne. We are told that the Etruscan forces are held at bay by the bravery of Horatius Cocles and the sacrifice of Mucius Scaevola. These stories, particularly the tale of Scaevola frightening off Lars Porsena and his army by holding his hand in a fire, bear all the signs of later embellishment, if not outright invention. Perhaps these miracles needed to be invented to fabricate a Roman victory against Porsena's forces where none existed, and no victorious commander could be named. For two intriguing passages in later Roman literature allude to Rome's humiliation by Porsena. Tacitus states that because it occurred by Roman hands, the destruction of the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline during the civil war associated with the Year of the Four Emperors was the most damaging event in all Roman history, even worse than the surrender to Porsena. This was the saddest and most shameful crime that the Roman state had ever suffered since its foundation. Rome had no foreign foe. The gods were ready to be propitious if our characters had allowed. And yet the home of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, founded after due auspices by our ancestors as a pledge of empire, which neither Porsena, when the city gave itself up to him, nor the Gauls, when they captured it, could violate. This was the shrine that the mad fury of emperors destroyed. If you're enjoying this video, please do us a favor by liking, commenting, and subscribing. We're a small channel, and this is the only way to get the almighty YouTube algorithm to notice us. Furthermore, you can help Tribunate become more sustainable by becoming a member for as little as 99 cents a month. Thank you for all of your support. Similarly, though he places this after the expulsion of the kings, Pliny the Elder details that Rome was so humbled by Porsena that the city signed a treaty forbidding the use of iron for any purpose besides agriculture. In the treaty which Porsena gave to the Roman people after the kings had been expelled, we find it specifically included that the Romans should not use iron except in the cultivation of the land. Perhaps Pliny may have certain facts wrong, but his testimony, and that of Tacitus that Porsena held the city and was able to dictate terms to such a degree that Rome was unable to possess any iron implements of war, does run counter to the traditional tale that his forces were defeated through Roman ingenuity, bravery, and virtue. As is typical in the study of the ancient past, the uncovery of additional evidence doesn't always clarify the picture. We can be left with more questions than answers, and reconciliation of previously held theories may actually become more difficult. So let's follow this line of thinking further. Tarquinius Superbus could have been deposed by Porsena, who then installed puppet leaders of his own in Rome, selecting 2 instead of 1 to ensure that each leader was able to keep his colleague loyal. According to this theory, Porsena then moved on from Rome to expand his empire further by conquering other Latin cities, but he was defeated in the Battle of Aricia in 504 BCE, something Livy himself acknowledges. This defeat weakened him, and his tenuous hold on Rome was broken. But instead of reinstalling the hated Tarquins or selecting a new monarch, the bizarre power-sharing agreement was maintained, and Rome opted to continue with 2 chief magistrates, a position that would become the consulship. I must stress that this is just a theory, and not even really one that I am all that committed to. The evidence is simply too sparse and too contradictory in places to make a definitive judgment. Though less fashionable now, some scholars still hew closely to the traditional account, if only because there is no satisfactory alternative, as it is where our limited surviving evidence points. The debate rages on, and it won't be settled anytime soon. But as we ponder these questions around the origins of the Republic, we must avoid holding to any conclusions so rigidly that we are unable to fairly evaluate forthcoming evidence. The past is an ever more distant place, but breakthroughs in methodology, scientific equipment, and even the discovery of new artifacts continue to re-illuminate the ancient past, and our picture is always shifting, ever so slightly. The treasure trove of documents in Herculaneum, which can now be deciphered thanks to breakthroughs in AI, have the potential to radically alter our understanding of the Roman world. It's an exciting prospect for those of us that are open to new evidence, even if this new material itself yields more questions than answers. So while I tend to place more credence in the ancient sources than most, and believe that even the most distant tales of Rome's past contain some accurate historical material, even if it is obscured by myth and later embellishment, I'm also happy to profess my ultimate ignorance as to where exactly myth and reality diverge as it relates to the earliest history of Rome. There's an immense freedom in knowing that we don't have all the answers, and that subsequent generations will improve upon everything we do as they work to continually develop a more accurate picture of the past. Work today will all be surpassed by later generations, just as monumental historians such as Gibbon and Mommsen are viewed as outdated today. Someday, you and I will be regarded as just as ignorant of history as Cicero was. That's not something to fear, but rather something to celebrate. We should rejoice in the fact that knowledge and the study of the past will be increasingly honed to the point where a young student in the future may possess a more accurate understanding of the Roman world than the most dedicated specialist working today. That's the reason we do history, after all. Not just because we love the past, but because we believe in the future.